I just made Artisan sourdough bread, and this is how I did it. Okay, let's get started. I already ground my wheat. I have hard red wheat in here. And the recipe is going to be 2 cups of sourdough starter, 1.5 cups of water, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and then a sweetener of whatever kind you want, 2 tablespoons. So honey, sugar, maple syrup, and a teaspoon of salt. I don't know if I said salt. But my starter, she was really low. So I poured a little bit off for later to feed, but I put my water in with my starter. So I'm gonna put that in our bowl. And I'm using a stand mixer this time, but in the video about my super soft sandwich loaf, I did everything by hand. So if you need a refresher on that, you can go check that out. Now I'm grabbing my salt. Awesome. And while I finish up adding all the ingredients, you're also going to need about 4 cups of flour. But again, I think I've said before, flour is very dependent on what kind of flour you're using, where you live, the hydration in the air, all of that. So that's going to be very personal. While I add the rest of the ingredients, I'm going to have future Taryn tell you about why I like sourdough, the benefits of sourdough, and what my sourdough routine looks like. I have been on my sourdough journey for a few years now. I started, I feel like, when everyone else did at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was pretty nervous just because everyone makes it seem very complicated, like you need a kitchen scale and feed and discard and so on and so forth. And I just felt like that was not something that I could keep up with. So I do more of a lazy sourdough technique. I use measuring cups and I go by consistency. I go by feel a lot of the time. And I can do another video on my routine with my sourdough starter. But sourdough, really and truly, when it comes down to it, is a leavening agent. And that just means something that will make your dough rise. So you can use a sourdough starter, you can use yeast. In baked goods, that's when you would use baking powder or baking soda. So it will make your baked good or whatever you're using, it will make it rise. So the other benefits that I really like is the fermentation process of your grains. So as you allow your sourdough to sit, how I was saying that I was going to allow mine to sit for 12 hours, that allows the sourdough to feed on the flour and the water and the little bit of sugar that we added. And that will sour the entire batch of dough. And when I say sour, it's just that little bit of tangy taste that you get in sourdough baked goods. And my family really likes it. My husband has issues with gluten, but he does not have issues with sourdough because you are partially digesting the gluten before you eat it. You can also use gluten-free flours too with sourdough, but that's not what we're doing today. So I really enjoy that process. It's more digestible. It makes the phytonutrients, which is like the nutrients that maybe isn't as great for you, it negates those and it adds other beneficial bacteria and yeast colonies. So all that to say, I really love sourdough. I feel like it's an art, but it's not nearly as complicated as I thought it was at the beginning. And I really think that it is something that everyone can learn to do. So this part, you can actually hear the bread coming together. It's pulling away from the side of the stand mixer, and I'll let it play for a second, but you can hear it mixing, but you can also hear kind of like a shoo, 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 shoo. That's the dough rubbing against the side of the bowl. And that's how, without touching it, you can tell that it's coming into a ball. So listen. It almost sounds like walking in sand. So that probably, yes. And that means that my dough has all come together. So I'm going to let it knead for about 5 minutes and we'll come back. Okay, this is the perfect consistency. I'm just taking the dough off my dough hook and I'm gonna pick the dough up and I'm gonna show it to you. It is going to be kind of sticky. That's okay and that's fine and that's normal, nor my hands, they're messy. But this is what you want. And what you're going to do is you are going to put it in a bowl and cover it with, put a little oil in there so it doesn't stick. Cover it with a damp tea towel or like dish rag and set it in a warm area for 12 hours. What I usually do is my oven has a bread proof feature. So I will put it in my oven and let that keep the temperature warm. If you don't have that, just pop it in your oven and put on the oven light and that will kind of warm that area up. If it's the summer, you don't need any of that. But you're going to allow the sourdough to ferment the dough. So that is the next step, but future Taryn already did that part. So let me show you what it looks like after it's been fermenting. Not future Taryn, past Taryn. So this is how big it's risen. And you can actually hear, I don't know, it'll come on camera. You hear that? Like crunchiness? That's the air bubbles. And that's how you know it's very well fermented. And now it's like not super sticky. So what I'm going to do is turn this out on my work surface and I'm going to flatten it out into a ball. Not a ball, an oval. My words today. So I'm flattening this out into kind of like an oval circle type shape. And we are gonna shape our dough ball. Now that we have it in a circle, we're gonna go around the circumference and bring the ends in. And you are creating a dome. And the seams eventually will be on the bottom. So once you have it kind of all pulled in like a little papoose, what you're going to do is flip it over and it will have surface tension on the top, because if you remember with my sandwich dough recipe, we want surface tension on the top. So we have this cute little dome and I'm going to grab, and I'm gonna try not to make too much noise. I have a proofing basket with parchment paper on the inside and I'm going to set my dough right in the middle and I'm going to let it do a second rise for an hour. And in that time, I'm going to preheat my oven. If you do not have a proofing basket, it's fine, just put it in a bowl and let it rise, but make sure that you have parchment paper in there. Use a cute little bread dough in my proofing basket. I love this part. So I'm just going to set this, let it have its second rise, and I'll come back and I'll show you the next step. Okay, so our dough is finished rising. It rose quite a bit. I'm very happy with it. It already smells good. But for the last 15 minutes while the oven has been preheating, I also preheated my Dutch oven. You don't have to have a Dutch oven for this. I just prefer it. If you don't have one, you just take the dough with the parchment paper and put it on a cookie sheet. It's fine. It'll still come out delicious. But I like the rise that the Dutch oven gives. So I did preheat it, and that's another reason that the parchment paper is so important. But I'm going to score my bread. And that's just making it to where when it rises, it kind of naturally will want to split. But if you score it, it will split in a really pretty way. Some people go crazy with this and make beautiful, beautiful designs. I just do like 3 little slits in the top of my dough and call that good enough. So I'm just using one hand to cut and one hand to feel the top of the dough. Now, the moment of truth, you want to be very careful when you are pulling your dough out of your bowl or out of your proofing basket, because you don't want to pop any of the bubbles that have been created. And you want to also not burn yourself putting it into your Dutch oven. And I have an enameled cast iron Dutch oven, and it is a 5-quart. Okay, yes, we have been successful, and the dough is now in the Dutch oven. I have the lid to it right here, so I'm going to place the lid on. I'm actually going to put on my oven mitts, because I want to make sure I get it on there well. It's a little bit harder with the parchment paper. So when putting something really heavy into the oven, I'm going to open the oven door first and make sure everybody knows it's open, especially if you have other people in your home who are blind or visually impaired. So I'm gonna open my oven first, then come back and grab my Dutch oven. And I could feel the heat coming out, and I'm tapping the oven door with my knee, and I'm going to lean over and use the Dutch oven as kind of like a cane to stick it in onto the rack. Now it's going to cook covered in the oven at 375 for 30 minutes. Then I'm going to take the lid off, and it's going to cook uncovered for another 10 minutes. All right, it's been the 10 minutes uncovered. I'm going to grab it out of the oven and see it on top of my stove. Cover the oven door. By the way, I also have meat stock simmering back here. So if you want to know how I make that, I can make a video on that. So I'm going to grab, it's hard with oven mitts, I'm here to tell you, because you can't really feel that well. But I'm going to grab the parchment paper, and I'm going to come to the cabinet over here. So it's super easy to take out of the pan when you have the parchment paper. And that's the sound you want to hear. So there we go. That is it. We made it. And it's kind of like a rustic dome shaped bread. And I usually have this with like soups or stews. You just want to make sure not to cut it yet, because as it's hot, it's still baking on the inside. So don't cut it quite yet. But that's how I make my Artisan sourdough bread. Thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. And until next time, happy homemaking.